Well, hi there. I hear you're interested in learning how to make an illustration in Adobe Illustrator using only a mouse. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hello and welcome. My name is Doodlemachine. Thank you for joining me. Let me start off by saying drawing tablets are awesome. They let you draw on the computer in a natural way, and they have a very quick learning curve. So in no time at all, you'll feel right at home drawing on the computer as if you were drawing or painting in real life. But not everyone has access to a drawing tablet, which is kind of silly to me considering how easy it is and how little you need to actually get started. I made a video on what you need to get started with digital art. There's a link in the description below. But for today's discussion, let's just assume that you don't have a drawing tablet for whatever reason. Maybe you want to try making pictures on the computer before you invest in any kind of equipment, or maybe you're on your laptop and you just don't have your drawing tablet with you, or maybe you think drawing tablets are malicious monsters from the evil art dimension and you'd rather stick with the clean, simple, modest, respectable mouse for your art. And that's totally fine, because you can make great art using only a mouse. Today I'm going to make a picture in Adobe Illustrator using only the mouse, and I'm going to explain step by step what I'm doing while I work, and hopefully I explain things well enough that you can follow along with me if you want to give this a try. So let's get into it. So here we are in Adobe Illustrator, and we're just going to create a new document, File New, and we're just going to go with the default settings and change this kind of stuff later if we want to. Now, it's probably easier if you start out with a sketch that you've drawn on paper. You can take a photograph of it and just drop your photograph in here. But I wanted to do this entirely from scratch, so I'm actually going to try and draw my sketch with a mouse. Usually I would at least draw my sketch on a piece of paper, but we'll see how this goes. We're going to use the brush tool right here, and we're just going to leave the default settings, and I'm just going to try and draw a cat. Draw a little background, a little horizon, and let's see here. I'm gonna make this a fat cat. It's just a sketch, it doesn't have to look great. You can change things along if you want to. Add another ear. Let's add some eyes on this guy. He's gonna be kind of a fat cat. That was my goal for this. I want to draw a chubby little cat. This is really weird drawing with a mouse. I am totally not used to it, but we're gonna do our best. And if you draw something you don't like, you can just undo it. Control Z, that's your undo. Or you can go to Edit, Undo. Okay, let's put maybe a rug under this guy. And no cat is complete without that crazy cat tail. All right, that's good enough. We're gonna call that our sketch. So what we wanna do is turn this sketch into a group and then make that group transparent. So that way we can use that group to guide our shapes, and then we can just get rid of the sketch when we're done. So I'm gonna highlight everything. I'm gonna go to Object, Group. There we go, and that's gonna turn that into basically one object that you can deselect and select the whole thing. Then we're gonna make this object sort of transparent. So you need to use the transparency palette. If you don't see your transparency palette, you go to Window, Transparency, and it'll pop up on the side here. So I'm going to select my sketch and I'm going to put that down to 10% opacity, roughly 10%. There we go. So I now have my sketched cat on its own layer as a group, and it's transparent. So I'm going to lock this layer so that way it doesn't accidentally select the sketch as I'm trying to work underneath it. And I'm going to create a new layer right down here in your layers palette. And I'm going to put that layer underneath my sketch. Now, there are a couple different ways you can handle the drawing of your shapes. And I'm gonna show you the most basic one, and that is using the pen tool. The pen tool is right here. And the pen tool works like this. You click to add a point. So if I were to click here, it would just add points along the way. But I don't just wanna add these points. So if you click and drag, it'll turn that point, instead of just a single point, it'll turn it into a curve, and you can actually drag the line and adjust the steepness of that curve as you work. So I'm going to put a point here and drag it. And I'm going to try and make it match up to my sketch. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is a art, it's not a science. And I'm going to go all the way down here and I'm going to drag at the bottom. Okay. Now, if I were to come over here, it would actually create this little curve at the bottom, which I don't want. So instead of just coming over here and adjusting the curve, I'm gonna click on this point, and that will terminate the curve that I've already started and allow me to create a nice crisp edge to it as I work across it. So let's give this object a color. This is gonna be our background. So over here in the colors palette, you can give this object a fill color or a stroke color. I don't want it to have any stroke color, so I'm gonna make the stroke color transparent right here, and I'm going to give it a fill color. Now, there are lots of ways you can apply color in Adobe Illustrator. You can use the swatches palette, but I like to mix my colors by hand. I'm kind of an old school guy. So the way that you do that is by adjusting these values right up here. But I don't find choosing colors in the RGB color space very intuitive, so I'm gonna switch this to HSB. It's popped off the screen, you can't see it, but you click this little box here and you just click HSB. And this is hue, saturation, brightness. So you can adjust your hue, which is the color of the object right up here. The saturation is the amount of color, so how colorful or how kind of gray and muted it is. And the brightness is how dark or light it is. So I want this to be maybe kind of like a brown color. I'm thinking I'm gonna make this a white cat, so I want it to be dark enough that it creates enough contrast in the actual cat if I want to make it kind of a creamy white color. And I don't want it too bright and colorful so that it distracts from my foreground. Okay, we're gonna call that good enough for now. Okay, so let's move on to the rug underneath the cat. So I'm going to draw, I want this rug to tuck underneath this background shape. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to start the drawing of the rug above the shape, because I'm going to send it to the back behind it, and then that will tuck underneath it. So I'm just going to quickly select a different color here. Let's just do another kind of brown color, maybe a darker brown. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click and drag with our pen tool just to create a stroke that's about the right shape that we want. Close it off. Okay, now we need to send this to the back of the stack. We need to put this behind the background shape. So the way you do that is Object, Arrange, Send to Back. And there we go. We're going to deselect that, and that object is now at the back of the stack. It's tucked behind the background. So we're going to get on to making the cat now. And we want to make the cat on its own layer because we're going to be adding a few extra details to the cat, which is going to be in the foreground, and the rug in the background, which is going to be in the background. And we don't want to be accidentally mixing up our objects as we work on the foreground or the background. So I'm going to call this layer down here in the layers. I'm just going to call this background. We're going to create a new layer, and this is going to be the foreground. And we're going to lock the background layer, so that way as we work, we're not accidentally selecting these background shapes. Let's move on to making this cat. Now, we're not going to use the pen tool for this. I want to do this one in a little bit of a different way. So in this one, we're going to be using the brush tool, and we need to draw each of the curves of this cat one by one, and then we're going to flatten all the curves into one single shape. Now, there's one key part of this, and it's that each of these curves has to overlap the other. The shape is not going to flatten properly if there are any gaps in the line work of our shape. So here we go. We're going to select a new color. There we go. And I'm going to draw each of these curves one by one with a mouse. There we go. I'm going to draw the next one and make sure to overlap on both sides of the line so that way we don't have any gaps. This one I'm going to treat as just one big curve. There we go. It's nice when you draw it with a mouse and it works out the first time and you don't have to adjust. And this cat, I'm gonna bring him down a little bit from the background just so that he doesn't, so he looks like he's sitting on the carpet instead of stuck against the background. Okay, so here we go. We have our cat and it is drawn with simple shapes and all of the shapes are overlapping. So now we can turn this into one object. And the way that we do that is with the Pathfinder palette. So we're going to select all of these lines of our cat. And if you don't see the Pathfinder palette, again, you got to go to Window, Pathfinder, and that'll pop up on the side over here. So the Pathfinder tool that we want to use is called Divide, and it's over here. And if we click Divide while we have all of these shapes selected, it's going to turn them into flat shapes. Now I seem to have lost my color, but you'll see right over here, the last color that I used is handily just ready for me at the bottom. So I'm going to click that, and there we go. I have turned all of these lines into one single shape. Now I'm going to draw on the tail, and we don't need to get fancy with the tail. We're just going to draw the tail with our mouse. Or you can use the pen tool if you don't think you're able to be precise enough with your actual brush tool. And we're going to select this, and we're going to make it the same color as the cat. The stroke is already on the same color that we used last time, but just to show you how you can do this, you can sample the color of the cat. You can make it the same fill and stroke, just with the eyedropper tool. Click on the cat. There we go. And just to keep things properly organized, I'm going to send this to the back. And we're going to go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. Let's make the tail just a slightly darker color because it's a little bit further back, and it'll help it stick out from the main body of the cat. And we're gonna do the same thing with his little paw over here. We're gonna draw on the paw, we're gonna select it, and using the eyedropper tool, sample that, we're gonna send it to the back. And I'm gonna use the shortcut for send it to the back, which is Control-Shift, square bracket open. There we go. Let's turn off our sketch and see how it's looking. Very nice. Okay, so let's just finish up here with our shapes. Now we have a paw and another paw, and they've actually got to come away from the body a little bit. So the way I'm going to handle these are, I'm going to draw their shape and I'm going to leave the stroke on this time. So let's see that. I'm going to make this a darker color just so you can see what I've done. And we're going to do the same thing with the back paw. We want to come away from the body a little bit. Now we have a stroke on these shapes, but we don't have a fill. So what we're going to do is we're going to sample, using the eyedropper tool, we're going to sample the color of the cat. And up here, you can see that the stroke or the fill can be selected. Right now it's the stroke, so I'm going to select the fill. And then I'm going to drag this on to one of those shapes that I just drew. And it's going to apply that fill or stroke to the object that I drag it onto. Okay, now I've made these strokes too dark, so I want to make their stroke color the same as the darker kind of fill color of this object and this object. So if I want to apply this color to the stroke over here, there are two ways you can do that. You can either create a swatch out of that color. So if I go to the swatches, I can drag this color over to the swatches. And then when I select the shape, I can select the stroke and apply that swatch to the stroke. Or I can sample the color from the object I want to use the color from, so this one here. But right now the fill is the only thing that is filled over here. Instead of dragging the fill onto that, I want to drag the stroke color. So I'm going to click on stroke, and instead of choosing a color for the stroke, I'm just going to drag the fill onto the object, and it's going to apply it as the color for the stroke because the stroke is the one that's selected right now. So I leave stroke selected, drag the fill, and boom, it applies the fill as the stroke color. It's a little bit convoluted. You can choose whichever way is easier for you. Let's continue on with our illustration. We need to do the face on this cat. I'm going to zoom into the face. And for this, we're just going to stick with the pen tool. We're going to click for our points and drag where we want a curve. There we go. Let's make these eyes white. And when you're using the pen tool, you might want to adjust the curve. You want to use the direct selection tool, which is right up here, or you can press A on the keyboard. And with this, you can select the individual points that you've drawn. So I'm going to select this point here, and maybe I want his eye to be a little bit bigger, a little less rounded. There we go. Let's give him like a kind of dark bag under his eye. I want this to look like a super lazy cat. So we're going to do the same thing. Okay. And then we are going to use our eyedropper tool and make it the kind of darker cat skin color that we chose. And we're not going to send it to the back because the back would be behind the actual body of the cat. So instead of that, I'm going to cut it out, Control X or Edit Cut. We're going to select the object we want to put it in front of. And then we're going to paste it in front, which is Control F or Edit, Paste in Front. And it's going to put it in the same place it was cut from, but it's going to put it in front of the current selected object. And that way you can kind of keep things organized. Okay, let's give him a pupil. Now, the way that you can do this where it looks like it's tucked inside the eye, I'll show you how to do that. What color pupil would this cat have? Let's choose an actual color that's different from the kind of monotone color palette that we're doing, just to give it a hint of some other color. Let's go with a blue, like a grayish blue, okay? Cat's eyes, I like to draw them with that weird kind of, what is it? Sort of like a cone shape almost. Now I'm going to change the fill and the stroke. I'm gonna click over here to swap the fill and stroke, so it's only the fill. There, now that eyeball shape, that pupil, is going outside of the actual white of the eye. So what I'm gonna do is use the white of the eye as a mask to chop off the edge of that blue. So I'm gonna copy this shape, paste it in front, then I'm gonna hold the Shift key on the keyboard so I can select both of the objects. We're gonna go to Object. Now to create a mask, you go down to Clipping Mask, Make, or you just press Control 7 on your keyboard. There you go. And now that white shape is masking the blue shape. So I want to group these and make a duplicate of it because I don't want to do the same work twice. So I'm going to select the white of the eye. I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard so I can select multiple objects. I'm going to click on the pupil and I'm going to click on that background shape. And let's make these a group. Control G. Turn on our sketch. Now we're going to duplicate these. You can either copy and paste like that, or you can click and drag while holding Control and Alt on the keyboard. And by the way, all these keyboard shortcuts, I speak in PC, but if you're a Mac person, I believe it's, using the Command key instead of the Alt key. I'm not sure how it works, but you can figure that out. I'm gonna hold Control and Alt on the keyboard as I click and drag, and it's actually gonna create a clone of it. There we go. And I want to make this eye a little bit smaller because it's a little bit further from the viewer. So I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard as I resize this and bring it down a little bit. And we'll put it exactly where I want it. There we go. All right, let's do this nose. This will be quick. Now to give him a pink or a black nose, we'll give him a pink nose, I think. A grayish pink. We don't want, and with this, we don't want any of the colors to be too over the top. Okay, and with the rest of the details on the face, I'm just gonna use the brush tool. No reason to get fancy with this. And we'll add on some whiskers. Now I'm gonna want these whiskers to be a little bit of a thinner stroke. So I'm gonna select all these. And using the stroke palette, again, if you don't see this in your Illustrator, you can open up any of the palettes by going to the window menu. Turn on your stroke palette, and we're gonna make this maybe a 0.5. A thinner stroke. We're gonna group that, duplicate it. And the way you flip it horizontally is you're gonna go to Object, Transform, Reflect, and you're gonna make sure your axis is vertical, click OK, boom, easy to do. And keep in mind, you can also rotate your objects. So if you use the edge of the selection rectangle, it'll change the scale of the object, but you can also rotate it by moving your mouse a little bit away from the edge. You get a little bit of a curved arrow. You can use that to rotate your objects just like that. And add a little bit more detail to these paws. Add some little claws down here, I think. Same thing on this one over here, and the back one. Add the little hole inside the ears. Let's make it the same color as, maybe the same color as the nose. I'll try and go for a color harmony here. And let's give him a few little hairs on top of his head. That'd be fun. There we go, close enough. There's my fat cat. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and add on a few more details. In this part, I'm not gonna explain everything I'm doing as I'm doing it. I think I've shown you the basics, and you can use that to make a similar illustration or follow along with this one. Now let's dive in and add a bunch of small details just to make this illustration really come to life. We're gonna go back to the background layer and add some more details to this brown shape to make it look more like a carpet. I think I'm gonna add some tasseled edges to it. This is the part of making the illustration that I love. It's when you've done the work of getting in the basic shapes, figuring out the colors, and everything is kind of where you want it, and then it's just a matter of adding lots of detail, and you just keep working on it until it looks good. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna group this carpet just so we have a grouped object. Make sure I have all the pieces selected, and I'm gonna go Control G for group. And it accidentally brought it to the front, so I'm just gonna send that to the back again. Now that I have it grouped, I can actually double click on it to edit just the group. So now I can work on it without having to regroup or anything like that. Choose a darker color and we'll add some stripes on this carpet, I think. Maybe these stripes are a little thin, so I'm going to select these and increase their width. There we go, that feels good to me. I'm going to add a few small fine details onto this. I'm going to choose a color that's similar to the background color, and I'm going to add some little hatches here and there just to kind of make this look like a shaggy, scruffy carpet. There we go, and let's use our masking technique to add some stripes to this wall in the background. This is where drawing with a mouse gets really weird, but I'm kind of getting used to it now. You really can make great pictures using just a mouse. There are quite a few pictures in my portfolio that for whatever reason I used a mouse. Maybe I just didn't have my drawing tablet with me. I had my laptop instead. There was one point where my drawing tablet died. I've gone through a few drawing tablets over the years. I use it pretty much all day, every day, so it kind of gets worn out, and eventually you'll get to the point where it dies and you got to get a new one, and then for like a day or two until your new one arrives, you don't have a drawing tablet. So with this one, I'm going to select these stripes that I put in the background. I'm going to group them. I'm going to select this object, this wall in the background, paste it in front of these stripes. Now I'm going to select both, and I'm going to use the clipping mask to make these, to crop off these stripes. And that's just Control-7, or you go to Object, Clipping Mask. There we go. And let's add a few more fine details to the cat itself. So anyone who tells you you can't make an illustration without a drawing tablet, they lying. You show them this video. If anyone tells you that, you say, hey, no, it's not true. Doodlemachine told me otherwise. Take a look. I'll set them straight. Mouse is getting a workout. I'm gonna wear out my left click. This mouse has already been replaced once by warranty because I used up all my left click. My left click budget had expired. One more thing I'm going to show you. I'm going to add a gradient to a few objects. So these ears, for instance, I want to make them a little bit darker on the kind of part where they would be tucked into the head. So the way I'm going to do that is over here in the gradient palette. Again, if you don't have a gradient palette on yours, go to Window, select Gradient, and it'll pop up on the side. Over here under the fill, I'm going to drag this fill color down here. And then I'm going to drag the same fill color from up in my color palette, and I'm going to make it a darker version of that fill color. And then you see there's already a black and white on there, so I'm just going to drag those off the palette to get rid of them. Now I'm going to keep this as a linear gradient, and I'm going to use the gradient tool, which should be in your tools bar, or you just press G, and you can click and drag. You can actually edit the position of the colors right on the gradient using these little sliders over here. And we're going to do the same thing with this ear here. We're going to select this ear, use the eyedropper, sample that color, use the gradient, and apply the gradient. Do the same thing with the nose too. It's a little darker on the bottom. We're going to do the same thing with this paw and the tail in the back. We're going to make it a little darker near the edge to make it look a little more tucked behind. See, my palette has reverted to RGB. We got to turn that back to HSB. There we go. And one at a time, I want this to be tucked in behind in just the right way. Maybe a little like that. And same thing with the tail. Tuck it behind just a little bit. And one more thing, I think I'm going to add a shadow underneath this cat onto this rug. So we're going to make this a black shadow. We're going to draw it on. Doesn't have to be exact. There's our shape, and we are going to cut it and paste it on top of the rug. And it is a little too dark, so we're going to want to apply a little bit of a transparency to this. So we're going to have this selected using the transparency palette. Maybe 20% opacity. There we go. And a few more fine details, and we're going to call this done. Okay, and this cat is done. So let's just crop it in using the artboards tool right over here. And we're going to drag the edge of the artboard right in to the edge of our illustration. Now, the most important part, which we probably should have done a lot earlier to avoid disaster, is to save our illustration. Caddy, cat. Leave the default. And we will now export a JPEG of our cat. So that way, because you can't really share an Illustrator document on social media or send it to anybody. So let's save a JPEG. The way I like to do this is to use the Save for Web. You can use the export, but the Save for Web gives you a little bit more control. File, export, Save for Web. Now in this window, you can leave it at the default size, or you can actually change the size. And keep in mind that this is a vector, so you can export it at any size you want. You don't have to worry about losing any quality. 300%. There we go. We're gonna get a nice big JPEG from this. Make sure to change your quality to very high or maximum, because the default quality is pretty low, and click Save. And one cool thing here, you can also use the Save for Web dialog to create a PNG that has transparency. So instead of JPEG, you go PNG 24. There you go. And you can save a version that has a transparent background. You can use this as some sort of clip art or some sort of graphic object in other designs. You can put another background behind it, whatever you want to do. There we go. That's my Fatty Catty made using only a mouse. It gets a lot easier. It'll feel super weird and foreign when you first start. It actually felt super weird to me right there when I started, but by the end of the illustration, you really get used to it and it becomes very natural. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you had fun and enjoyed yourself. And if you were following along, I hope yours worked out as well. Please let me know in the comments below. What do you think of my illustration? What do you think of the technique? Have you ever had to, in a pinch, make an illustration using only a mouse, and how did it turn out? I'd love to chat about it with you down there. And while you're down there, click the thumbs up button if you like the video. Click the thumbs down button if you dislike it. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. And as always, thanks for watching.